Okay, we're live.
Give me a minute. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to What the F is Going On in Latin America and the Caribbean. So happy to be with all of you today. I'm Terry Matson, and I'm a volunteer with the Code Pink Latin America team. I'm happy to introduce to you this season my co-host, Alina Duarte. And we are broadcasting live to you tonight from Mexico City. Alina is a good friend, a radical journalist here in Mexico and throughout Latin America and the Caribbean. She is also the international coordinator for the National Institute of Political Formation here in Mexico. That's the English translation, Instituto Nacional de Formación Político. And she also is a co-host of a terrific new show on Canal 11 here in Mexico City. Program is called Sin Muros, Without Walls. And that program broadcasts 11 p.m. on Canal 11 on Tuesdays in Mexico and on social media platforms too. Is that correct?
Yes. Well, I'm so happy of being here with you, Terry, once again in WTF is going on in Latin America. So there's a lot of things to say on this episode. So thanks for inviting me. Thanks for making this happen again. So let's see how it goes.
Well, we should give a big shout out to Michelle Elner, who's the Code Pink Latin America campaign coordinator. She's providing the technology this evening. So she's a big variable in making all this happen for us tonight. So everyone, Alina and I are going to first talk to you about this ominous choice of Ronald Johnson as Trump's hawkish ambassador to Mexico. He arrived in Mexico a week ago Friday and presented his credentials to Mexican President Claudia Sheinbaum a week ago, or last Monday, I believe, the 19th. And Johnson is a former Green Beret, a CIA veteran, and friend of Bukele in El Salvador. So we've got a lot to talk about with him. And for those of us who worked in Central America in the 80s, he is like one of those figures that has really never gone away. So it's a pretty profound message that he's sending to Mexico in the region. And then the next part of our conversation, we're going to invite Marco Castillo. He is the executive director of Global Exchange. And he's going to talk to us about the US-Mexico-Canada agreement, or as we call it here in Mexico, TMEC. Marco organized last week's binational assembly on TMEC. I was able to attend that in person. It was a great meeting and brought some real humanitarian issues and human rights issues into the conversation and of what the TMEC agreement should look like when it's finalized. So Marco will join us in the second half of the program sooner. Oh, here he is now. So let's, here we go. Welcome, Marco. Well, Lena, why don't we start while he joins us?
Hello.
Oh, hey, how are you? Thank you so much.
Oh, of course, of course.
So Marco was joining us from New York. And Marco, we just were letting the audience know about the new ambassador, US ambassador to Mexico, and that his credentials were presented on the 19th and accepted, and that he has a very a pretty scary background, actually, for those of us that work in this region. And so I think let's start with a conversation about him, his background, and what it means that he is Trump's choice. And then let's move on to your binational assembly that you helped organize and lead last Wednesday here in Mexico City. So I want to share one thing, because Alina and I found this fascinating when we started talking about putting this episode together. In April of 2022, she and I had a WTF episode called Challenging the US Narrative on Mexico. And I want to read to you the short introduction to that episode. So this is April of 2022. On Sunday, April 10th, 2022, Mexicans went to the polls to determine whether sitting President Andrés Manuel López Obrador should or should not remain in office to finish the remaining 3 years of his 6-year term. Of the approximately 16 million citizens that participated, over 90% voted yes, AMLO should continue his presidency. Several of the energy reforms envisioned by the president for his remaining 3 years are not supported by Washington, as suggested in a series of anti-energy reform articles published by Bloomberg last fall, I think it was October of 2021. So this is not anything new. And I think that's why, we felt it was so important to have this conversation with the arrival of the new ambassador. He is, an endpoint on this continuum that has been building since the fall of 2021. This anti-Mexico, anti-Morena, anti-AMLO, and now anti-Sheinbaum narrative, principally for, and I would argue personally, principally for energy purposes related to big tech, AI, and electric vehicles, but that's a whole nother conversation. But after that episode in April of 2022, then we started hearing this narrative in the US Congress developing this anti-cartel narrative. And then we started hearing that US military equipment sent to Ukraine was being sold on the Ukrainian black market to Mexican cartels. Then we have the introduction of possible military intervention from the US Congress. And then, of course, once Trump is elected, we get this, the cartels in Mexico are labeled terrorists. And now we have Johnson as the new ambassador from the US. So it's a continuum. My argument is, it's a continuum for several years. This isn't like, oh, ta-da, all of a sudden we have this hawkish ambassador. He's like the ultimate peace, I suppose, or near peace. So what do you two think of that, or how do you feel about this man being the new ambassador?
Marco?
I mean, I think, hello everyone, and thank you for inviting me, and always lovely to see you, Alina, compañera. So yes, I think it's totally a Trump 2.0. I also want to remind everyone that the first U.S. ambassador to Mexico, Christopher Lando, during the first Trump administration, it's right now a deputy secretary of state, that you've seen him sitting next to Trump when he was, ambushing the president of South Africa with all these lies. So it's a line of Department of State workers that have put themselves at the service of neo-reactionary and ultra-conservative politicians. But in this case, I think that he's going to level up, because it's a declaration of war basically on Mexico. And it feels like one step before Trump, attempts to step foot in Mexico. We should all be concerned. We should all be wary. We should all be fighting the naming of this individual who has no background in promoting peace and understanding between nations, but more than anything, fighting the will of the people, fighting democracy, being an enemy of the majorities, and a defender of the elites. And you saw it on day one, even before he received his credentials. He was having dinner with Verástegui, which, I don't know if everybody is familiar with who he is, but it's the CPAC representative in Mexico. He's been trying to be Trump's underdog in Mexico for a while, with relative success, obviously with no success in Mexico. But he greeted this individual, this ambassador, even before he was officially named. And the fact that he accepted publicly to meet with him, it's another political statement. He's showing who he is, and so it's not good. It's not a good message, and this is not how the U.S. should be trying to establish a relationship with its closest neighbor. And what Donald Trump is doing by naming this individual U.S. ambassador in Mexico, it's going to work against the U.S. Mexico continues to lose trust in the United States and in its real interests and agenda, and they're going to pay a high cost.
Well, something that you said, Marco, it's always good to see you too, that it's really, really important. It's now the key role that Mexico has now in the U.S. Foreign policy. Now it's not only Marco Rubio, an expert of interference in Latin America, but it's also Christopher Landau, who knows exactly what is going on here in Mexico, the former U.S. ambassador, now as a deputy secretary of state. And now having a Ron Johnson here in Mexico, of course, is a statement. He, as a new ambassador, is only a small part of the U.S. strategy to soften its policy toward the Mexican government. And I say it's only a small part because they've tried more things during specifically last month, and also during the first mandate of Donald Trump. For example, they couldn't attack enough through the narrative, saying that we were communists. I don't know if you remember that Donald Trump said something like AMLO is a socialist, but I like him, or something like that. But they've been trying. They've tried a lot with a lot of stuff. Then they couldn't impose tariffs like in the rest of the world, only on steel and aluminum. It's not. Wasn't that bad, but it shows the importance of Mexico now in the foreign policy of the U.S. So we also saw what happened with the narrative against migrants, against the drug cartels. But I think that the most important thing of the new ambassador, or I don't know if only for myself, is that I think there's going to be some sort of continuity with what he does in El Salvador with Nayib Bukele, and he's going to try to impose it here in Mexico City. So I'm really scared of this new ambassador here in Mexico City.
He has, for the audience, he in the 80s, he was in El Salvador, working with right-wing opposition guerrilla figures. And he was also in Panama in the 80s, just before the 89 coup. So, his resume is not encouraging in the least. And I know for those of us, my peers who were working in Central America in the 80s and human rights and trying to keep US out of there. This is really, that's like I said, opening the program. It's like these people simply don't go away. They go out of the, public vision, but they never go away as far as formulating, policy. And it's that policy that has basically remained unchanged, at least since the 80s. And I think you could really argue since the end of World War II in Latin America and the Caribbean, the whole US intervention, the preservation of the Monroe Doctrine, and using very, very, very evil, I don't even know, violent, evil tactics to maintain US hegemony on the region. And we're just really seeing that so overtly again. But I also think it's important to recognize that this intervention, this masks off intervention, it did not happen January 20th of this year. It's been coming. One of the things that happened during the Biden administration, when General Laura Richardson was in command of the Southern Command, she was all over the hemisphere, reopening military bases, strengthening existing alliances, creating new alliances. And so so much of this has been put in place already, and it's the culmination of multiple US administrations. And I think we have a question. Okay, we have a question for this part of the, I'd like to know, what exactly is Mexico doing to not cooperate or favor the genocide in Gaza? Does anybody know specific actions? Well,
yeah.
Do you want to address that?
No, I mean, I think that Alina will know better, but I can certainly say that Mexico is doing way more than what the United States is doing, and we're not in the same position. And I think that Mexico has officially called for a ceasefire, and more than a couple of occasions, formally at the UN and publicly, and in general, not only the government but also society, Mexican society in general, has expressed its solidarity in many ways. But Alina will know better.
Well, for now, the government of Claudia Sheinbaum has condemned the genocide and has called for a ceasefire. He has given evidence that has been presented to the International Court of Justice, but also there is a movement now here in Mexico that is pushing Claudia's government to cut ties, to demanding the breaking of relations with Israel. And I think this is because of the pressure that the Mexican government has of the Israeli government in terms of economics, in terms also, I don't know if it's on the table, but during several months, there were speculations that the government didn't say something, because I don't know if you remember that there are people who has been involved in the case of Ayotzinapa who is in Israel. So that was a key point for the government, or people were saying that, for not breaking relations with Israel. So, I mean, there are so many people. Actually, today at the press conference in the morning, there were a movement outside National Palace demanding to break in relations with Israel.
One of the things that happened, I believe, 2022, correct me if I'm wrong, maybe 2023, was that the Palestinian special mission or special diplomatic mission here in Mexico City was upgraded to a full embassy recognized by the Mexican government and foreign ministry. So that was a big, I think that was in 2022. So that was a early on big recognition. The Palestinians have had a special diplomatic mission here, but to upgrade it to a full embassy and recognize it as such was a big deal. It was done very quietly. And I imagine so as not to disrupt relations up north, but it was a big deal. And there was a fantastic, which you organized a terrific event at the Instituto Alina for the 77th anniversary of the Nakba, a wonderful panel discussion, including the ambassador from Palestine to Mexico. And then there was a huge march in the city as well the following Sunday. So that was, I should say that the ambassador to Mexico from Palestine, she's a lovely, lovely person. I mean, beautiful woman inside and out, there's a humanity about her that you just feel when you're in her presence. And she's incredibly articulate and as you can imagine, very, very intelligent. She's a fantastic representation of her people and her culture and her heritage. It was really an honor to meet her, and you put together a terrific event. So
let me Terry, before we move on to the next topic, let me just get back very quickly to the Ron Johnson.
yeah, please.
I think that it is important for people in the United States to understand that it is not only Mexico's responsibility to fight this, the naming of this ambassador. It is a responsibility also of people in the United States because, again, as I mentioned, the United States, it's going to resent the consequences of this. It's going to feel the consequences of this designation because, presidents come and go. Hopefully, Donald Trump will be here even less than 4 more years if we organize ourselves in the United States and impeach him. But presidents come and go, and Mexico will always be next to the United States. And if you don't protect and if you don't collaborate with your neighbor, if you don't build friendships, if you burn bridges, if you bully, and if you attack your neighbor, you are working against your own fate, and that's not good. And so I think it's important that we mobilize across the U.S. to express our indignation, our full rejection of the naming of someone who is an interventionist, pro-war individual who has no interest in creating a friendship.
I would like to add something too before we move on to last week's assembly. Johnson presented his credentials on Monday, May 19th, and on Tuesday morning, the 20th, we saw 2 really horrific assassinations here in Mexico City, the day after this man arrives. And Alina, you probably have the most information on who those 2 victims were and potentially and why they were targets.
Yeah, well, it was something that happened last week here in Mexico City. There were 2 comrades who work with Clara Brugada, the governor of Mexico City. Something that has been going on here in Mexico City is they've been fighting against these members of drug cartels and stuff. So what we saw, it was shocking because there were 2 members really close from Clara Brugada, from the governor, And it's something that hasn't happened ever here in Mexico City. And actually something that was consequence of this were the declarations of Marco Rubio in the US. And I don't want to leave Marco Rubio out of the equation, who has already announced in this in this moment that he will come to Mexico. He's a figure who, in the name of fighting communism and terrorism, has sought to attack and overthrow left-wing's government in the whole region or even in the whole world. And part of his statement before the Senate, in the Senate, is that the Mexican government has collaborated in crime against the criminal organizations and immigration. But he says also that the organized crime uses weapons that have been bought in the U.S., and that confession is no small matter. And I would like actually to ask you, Marco, what is the responsibility that the government of the U.S. has in what is going on in Mexico, not only during the last week, but during the last decades?
That's a good question, because that ties right into some of the issues brought up in last week's binational assembly.
If the United States really wanted to help combating crime, and if really wanted to address the root causes of migration, they should do their job, and they should be stopping U.S. guns from coming into Mexico, investing in securing the border, not from migrants, but from guns going down south. Uh, the murderous attack on this two progressive government officials, very well liked, uh, most probably happened with U.S. guns. 70% of guns recovered in crime scenes in Mexico can be traced back to the United States. And the percentage is way higher, considering that not all guns can be traced to anywhere. So it's I mean, just again, like it happened with Marco Suastegui a month ago, land defender in Guerrero, and so many other leaders that we've lost. Um, we've lost them to U.S. guns, and fentanyl, if it's trafficked from Mexico, it is trafficked with the use of U.S. guns. People who are being trafficked and are being forced with U.S. guns. So if the U.S. is interested in talking about securing their borders, they should be investing in stopping U.S. arms.
And also, just to follow up, Marco, I remember that the Mexican government sued the U.S. Government for arms trafficking. Is there any update on that?
Yes, well, there's two lawsuits. So it's one is again gun producer manufacturer, and another one is it's again against a gun shop in Arizona. So we recently heard the case on the Supreme Court for the lawsuit against gun manufacturers, and we don't know the outcome. It should be coming out in the next week or so. We're going to hear from the Supreme Court if it's going to be completely dismissed, or if there will be some elements that can be used to, uh, launch different new lawsuits, and it's right now in the hands of the Supreme Court to see. Most probably they're gonna dismiss the case overall, but they might acknowledge some aspects of the lawsuit that can provide grounds and a precedent for other lawsuits. And in the case of the lawsuit against gun uh, shops in this specific gun shop in Arizona, we still haven't heard, and that's something that still remains in to be heard in lower courts, and then see if it goes up to the Supreme Court too.
So thank you, Marco, and I think this is a great place to have you speak about last week's binational assembly on Temet, because the gun trafficking was one of the security and humanitarian issues discussed in the assembly. This was Wednesday of last week here in Mexico City. Was fantastic. You did an incredible job organizing it, and a terrific participation in person and online. And so could you tell us, first of all, what is TAMEC, or US Mexico Canada agreement in up north, what it is, how you came to put this assembly together, and then some of the highlights of the conversation, because I so clearly remember I sat in on the immigration workshop, and then of course we had that fantastic group, a full group discussion on security, which is a whole lot of things, including, digital security, but the arms issue did come up and was a significant part of that conversation.
Yes, well, thank you for that, Terry, and it was mostly the job of the team in Mexico. Elena Gutierrez, Alberto Solis did an amazing job in putting it together. But what this assembly attempted was to try to disrupt the upcoming trade negotiations on the USMCA agreement, which is probably the biggest trade deal in the world, whose total value of trade between the US, Mexico, and Canada under USMCA reached approximately $1.8 trillion annually. So it's a humongous deal that has given billions and trillions of dollars to a handful of corporations. It has created an immense amount of jobs, and we have to acknowledge that also. And Mexico in recent years has become also very dependent on that negotiation, on that trade deal. But the truth is that in terms of rights and safety for communities and citizens across the country, this deal has represented no benefit. There are many companies, particularly Canadian companies, that have been responsible for horrible crimes committed against mine workers, and Mexico is still looking for the remains of some of them, and so it's a complicated situation because despite Mexico being a mostly progressive government in the past few years, since 2018, USMCA has become a central part of the economic life, and particularly Marcelo Ebrard, as the head of the foreign minister, and then the Ministry of Economy, has become like a champion of defending the interests of corporations in USMCA. So it's been complicated, but we think that it is about time that USMCA is no longer negotiated separate from a conversation on peace, human security, human rights, and social justice. Again, as I've mentioned before, workers in Mexico are exposed to multiple labor violations under USMCA, but also exposed to great forms of violence because of US guns. We must remember that many corporations have been growing, the number of private security that they hire to protect their interests. The attacks on independent union leaders have grown, and the attacks on union organizers. And so it is crucial that we make the case that not only in Mexico, because this assembly is also happening in the US and Canada with labor unions and organizations, saying that we can no longer talk about trade without talking about rights. And the other part of the conversation is, as Donald Trump is launching an unprecedented attack on Mexican immigrants across the United States, at the same time, he depends on Mexican labor to maintain the economy, to maintain the agriculture, the agricultural industry, the food industry in Mexico, and I'm sorry, in the U.S. And so he plays dumb, but he's not an idiot. He can threat with all sorts of tariffs, but so far he has sustained USMCA because he knows what it represents to him. So he has threatened that he might, get rid of it. Um, so that's kind of the general messaging, Terry. So we should have a conversation on rights, and or otherwise both Mexico, US, and Canada should drop it completely. If we're not included in this new moment, then might as well just get rid of it, because it has never worked, nor for the American workers, not for the United States workers, not for Mexican workers, not for Canadian workers. And it has benefited largely, corporations. And let's also remember that USMCA, more than a tax cut, which has an aspect of it, is more than anything an agreement that protects the patents of many U.S. corporations, and it has allowed big pharma and big tech industries to expand their empires across Mexico with impunity, and without, and under very unfair conditions for Mexican companies that might attempt to do the same, would be, subject to huge lawsuits under USMCA. So it represents a fruit of U.S. Mexico Canada dialogue, but it also represents some of the worst cahoots between corporations, forcing governments to accept their conditions. And meanwhile, the populations of Mexico, US, and Canada are not allowed to, move across the region, to organize across the region. So it is completely unacceptable.
And it's so important what you've been saying, Marco, about this USMCA, because it's important to know that Mexico is the U.S. main trading partner right now, contrary to what many people believe inside and outside the
Correct.
U.S. And that also puts the relationship with Mexico on a different level of negotiation. I would like to hear you about the relationship with Mexico in terms of uh, if there is something that we've been able to make progress both in the USMCA and also in Mexico's sovereignty. Many people are paying close attention to this bilateral relationship every time that Trump say something against Mexico or in general, when Claudia answers energically. But what we should prioritize in this relationship? I mean, you've been talking about arms trafficking, labor rights. What points are forgotten on these bilateral talks?
Well, that's a really important question, Alina, and thank you. Mexico must not let Donald Trump decide what the priorities should be. We should not listen and look at his, threats and attacks, because he's always looking closely at what the response will be. And Mexico should stay firmly on the defense of Mexican sovereignty, but we also believe that Mexico must double down in their demands for the US to control US guns, but also be a fierce advocate for the rights of migrants, the rights of workers in the region, and the rights of minorities across the region. Mexico right now, it's the most progressive actor in a region that it's been characterized by neoconservative governments and by racist statements, even from Canadians, that they reacted in such a poor way when Trump threatened Canada. Their first reaction is like, "Wait, we're not Mexico. We are, we are friends. Come on, Trump. We look alike, right? We're not brown." That's kind of what they said, and so that was really disappointing. And so Mexicans and the Mexican government, it's the only one who can have a voice. And it is important to understand, Alina and Terry, that Mexico is not alone. Many people in the US are completely against what's happening, including unions that are, kind of leaving their moment with Trump, expecting that he uh, represents their highest, aspirations in the USMCA negotiation by bringing back jobs to the United States. I doubt he will do that. But there are some progressive actors that are looking closely at what Mexicans are doing and demanding and Mexican workers. But there's also, plenty citizens and immigrant communities and organizations that are in support of the Mexico agenda. And that's what we've been working really hard to build across borders and across sectors, bringing together indigenous, Native American, Afro-descendant leaders, migrants from across the region, to speak with one voice in favor of peace.
So Marco, that we've got an excellent commentary question from your compañero at Global Exchange, Ted. and your comments lead right into what he's asking. So let me read this to you. What can the Mexican government do to assure victims of violence, land defenders, indigenous communities, as you just mentioned, in Chiapas, specifically Chiapas, Guerrero, and elsewhere in sectors of urban communities under de facto control of criminal organizations? I think that's what you meant, Ted. That their voices are being heard and attended to. He says, I fear that the widespread impression that the government is ignoring serious problems feeds the Bukele mentality that if liberal governments can't take care of these problems, that maybe you need a hardliner. What can the Mexican government do to build bridges to communities that feel ignored so as not to play in to the divide and conquer tactics of of Ambassador Johnson and his bosses, the new ambassador that we opened the conversation about this evening? It's a loaded question, Ted, but thank you.
I mean, I would like to hear Alina's response. I can say that yes, indeed, the Mexican government has the double or triple responsibility of being better than Donald Trump, always and better, and being better than Bukele, and set an example that the progressive agenda is the best way to go to face the challenges. And it is true that the Mexican government faces severe challenges when it comes to its relationship with civil society in some sectors in civil society in Mexico, particularly those impacted by violence, whether they are relatives of the disappeared or land defenders or indigenous communities. But my response is very simple. I mean, the Mexican government should continue and increase dialogue with all of those actors, should ensure protection for anyone who's a threat, and continue to put the finger on the root causes of violence, root causes of migration, and denouncing the role of U.S. imperialism in the region. But yes, in order to have the legitimacy to criticize your competitor, your neighbor, your rival, your adversary, you need to set the example. And so yes, we want the Mexican government to do more in terms of protection and dialogue with those who feel ignored, and I would extend by saying with those who feel and see and live the consequences of violence, for example.
Yeah, and I
That was
think that
part of the security segment of your assembly last week too. That was one of the very specific segments of last week's assembly was, not just international, but national concerns too. I'm sorry, Alina, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but go ahead.
Great. I don't think that we have so many examples that what can we do? For example, we have to look at what happened in the so-called progressive governments in Latin America during the last 2 decades. All the limitations they faced, the obstacles, the contradictions, the tensions. I think the governments had every intention, and in many cases, they succeed in reducing inequality, violence. But alliances with social movements are especially fundamental. I think during these governments, they had so many tensions, as I said, within these leftist governments. I believe it's time to deepen information, political education, dialogue, and debate with historically legitimate demands of social movements, as is now the case. For example, I must say the case with the teachers that are now protesting exactly in this moment here in Mexico City. And this is not a new movement. They've been asking for better salaries during the last 4 decades, for better working conditions, and it's not against these are not demands against the government. It's part of the everyday fight. So we must also know how to make a difference between the government's obligations and the movement's obligations to keep the utopia, as we said here in Mexico City, on the horizon. And I must say that utopia should be anti-capitalist, anti-imperialist, that goes to the root of the thing. So this is not new. This is not exclusive of Mexico, but we need to look what happened in the region for the last decades.
Yeah, I was on a webinar last night where that same exact thing, what has happened to the left in the region. It's been very diluted. And I mean, we really have we're really in a new map of the region in this moment. It's not, I mean, you have leftist governments, we have those that identify as progressive, we have those that are still trying to figure it out, in my opinion, and we have more and more right-leaning governments, and some very far to the right. It's a real mezcla right now, real churn almost from what we've known.
I also want to say that we should also keep in mind that the United States, Donald Trump, the United States government wants Claudia Sheinbaum to fail, wants for the so-called fourth transformation to fail, and that's one of the reasons why Ron Johnson was sent, and to give a huge hug to Verástegui on behalf of the United States government, on behalf of Donald Trump, and send a signal that they're going to be doing whatever they can to have the government fail and impose a populist ultra conservative leader in the presidency. So this government, Claudia Sheinbaum's, right now, it's probably under a lot of pressure, a lot of attack, and on so many different fronts, from the demands of sectors in civil society to the attacks from the United States administration, and the divide inside of her government and in her political party or movement. They're dealing with a lot of pressure, and we as progressives should stand in support, and try to express our support as much as we can. Yet at the same time, we should demand the Mexican government to stand up to their promise, and double down on their commitment um, not only by providing, you know, a network of financial support and public benefits for the poor, but by building a real radical democracy that gives voice to those who right now feel like can't say anything. So it is really important to look closely at what's going to happen in the judicial election, that it's also under attack. And the obviously the conservatives are trying to destroy the election. And again, it's the same. We should make sure that we express our support for this democratic event, but yet at the same time, we should demand that the government keeps their hands off the candidates, that it is the people who legitimately, you know, decide who the representatives will be in the judicial, and set out an example that could be replicated in other countries in the good way, and not a precedent of a failure that then could be used against the Mexican government. So the stakes are high, the pressure is a lot. It's been and Claudia Sheinbaum has proven to be able to stand up to the challenge. I think that she's proven to be very, you know, focused on her job, and but they need to strengthen their alliances with all sectors of society to, you know, because they're going to try to weaken them, and they're going to try to divide, intervene the military in Mexico, and all the sort of stuff that Ron Johnson might be an expert into it.
All the stuff, yeah, the internal disruption, yeah. We have a few minutes left, and I promised Michelle that I would keep our conversation to a tight 60 minutes. So I have to be very disciplined. But there's a couple things I wonder if we could touch on. First, I just want to say, Marco, you mentioned the 4T, or the fourth transformation. We do have from 2 years ago, I believe, in our WTF archives, a lengthy conversation with your compañero Kurt Hackbarth at Sin Muros, Alina, where he went into great depth about what the fourth transformation is. So for those of you who want to know more, that maybe we can put that in the comments, Michelle, or I can. And then also, the elections June 1. Alina, can you give us just, you know, what are, Marco, I so agree with you being here, you know, how important it is, and what this type of election and representation means, not just for Mexico, but the example it's going to, you know, give to the rest of the hemisphere, to the rest of the world. So what is happening on Sunday, June 1st, Alina? You had a great pancarta the other day. Illustrate some great educational materials about this at lunch the other day.
Well, we're going to elect the half of the judiciary power here in Mexico, because next year we're going to have elections again. And I think in a moment where we've seen a lot of coups, a lot of destabilization in the region through the judiciary power, I think we are making history this Sunday. I totally agree with Marco when he says that Ronald Johnson is here to make these kind of alliances with the right wing in Mexico, as Trump did in Brazil with Bolsonaro, in Argentina with Milei. So we must go in every single way to strengthen this radical democracy in Mexico. I think that's going to happen. It's a whole new process, what we are going to see this Sunday. We need to see what are the failures and what we need to do better for the next year. But we're gonna elect all. I think there are, I don't know how many. I don't know, hundreds of. I don't know, like the Supreme Court. We're gonna elect the whole members of the Supreme Court, of the tribunals, the electoral tribunal. I mean, it's gonna be amazing. So just to be on time, I fully agree with Marco that the fourth transformation must continue going back to the roots, generating a conscious mass movement. And I think we need to make history this Sunday so we can have another episode of WTF to see what happened this June the 1st.
It's the people are going to directly elect the judiciary. And that's the uniqueness of it and the profoundness of it. And it is a really significant event for the region and the world. I mean, it's really exciting. I have one last question, comment that I missed earlier, and I apologize. It's just a clarification, basically. Didn't Mexico join the South African ICJ case against Israel? I believe that happened last year. That was a great question, and thank you for the reminder.
No, I think it was another one with Chile. It was different.
Yes, I don't think Mexico joined South Africa.
Yeah, it was another one.
Okay, it was something different. Okay, thank you for the clarification. I thought Mexico joined, but late. But anyway, that's some homework for me. Thank you. So, Michelle, our wonderful tech for this evening, and is there anything else that we need to follow up on in the social media chats, or did we hit all the points that people were interested?
I just want to say, Terry, of course, thank you both, but I just want to say, as a result of our convening, we're going to come up with a document with an agenda of priorities for Mexican workers, and so the next step is going to be we're going to be holding meetings with our Canadian and U.S. partners, and we're going to come up hopefully with a tri-national agenda in favor of workers' rights, peace, human rights, and justice. And we're going to make sure that our voices are heard. We're going to go to Washington, D.C. We're going to bring our message. We're going to come together as progressives from the three countries to say no more business without us and no more trade without rights. And if not, let's just get rid of USMCA. Let's see if Trump stands up to the challenge, and we will continue also supporting the Mexican government in its fight for the U.S.'s responsibility on guns, and also to continue in our support for independent movements like the teachers or Zapatistas or any of the independent community policing and all the projects that are fighting in Mexico at the local level to defend life and protect rights, and with all of those historically marginalized from national projects. Thank you very much.
Marco, where can people find out more about this project? It's so fun. I mean, it's profound. It's huge and it's profound, and it's so important.
Yeah, thank you. Follow Global Exchange on our networks. Here's the name and here's the logo. So
Global Exchange.
Globalexchange.org. Here's the website and yeah.
Yeah. Well, and what did you want to add, Alina? Anything?
No, I just want to say the job that is doing Global Exchange coping in this moment are just wonderful. And thanks you both for everything you're doing, the organizations, and thanks Terry for the invitation, and thanks Marco for joining us today.
I have to say thank you both of you. It's been like a 2-year hiatus for me, and I'm so thankful you both were so willing to participate in this relaunch for me on a personal level as well as on an activist level. So thank you for your profound insight and experience and your knowledge and your comments. It was a great conversation, and I agree, Alina and Marco too. We're going to have a follow-up conversation after Sunday's judicial elections, because that's a real example for all of us. So,
definitely.
Okay, everyone. Thank you so much for joining. Oh, Mesu, I have to give a shout out to you. Thank you for your lovely comments, and it's wonderful to be back with all of you on the air. And again, thank you, Alina. Thank you, Marco. And we'll see you all